There is $1 million up top for the Open Championship on DraftKings this year, and SaberSim users have crushed the golf season so far this year. A SaberSim member has won the $1 million prize for both the Masters tournament and the PGA Championship earlier this year, 2 out of the 3 Millie Makers offered so far, and this is your last opportunity to win $1 million playing daily fantasy golf in 2024. My name's Jordan Chan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in this video, I will give you a step-by-step process that you can steal for building profitable DFS golf lineups on SaberSim for this week's Open Championship. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, what I like about this strategy is it is a lean and efficient process that you can follow here, where you're letting the Sims do a lot of the dirty work for you of building the profitable foundation of your portfolio here, while you're still getting an opportunity to apply your unique research and takes about the slate. Once you've got the slate loaded up in SaberSim, the first thing you want to do is get your entries file uploaded. This is going to make it a lot easier for us to run our contest sims and get your lineups into your contest once we're all done. To do that, we'll go ahead and head over to the contest tab here first, download template file from DraftKings, and just drag and drop and get our entries loaded up here. I'm playing the Birdie and the Mini Max here, but if you're playing the Millie Maker, this is where you'll see it. The next step is if you're on the SaberSim Ultimate plan to get your contest sim configured now. We'll go ahead and right click here and add a contest sim. And this is going to pull in the actual dynamics of this particular contest here, the payout structure, the size, and the expected field that we expect you to be competing against here. So we're ready to run a contest sim once our lineups are built. We'll just go ahead and click Save Settings and bounce back over to the build. In general, the process you want to be following on SaberSim is build, review, revise. We're not going to make a ton of changes up front here. Instead, letting SaberSim's hole-by-hole simulations of the tournament build out a big, profitable pool of viable candidate lineups we could take with us into our contest. We'll filter those lineups down and sort them to find the best ones and pick our favorites out depending on our particular research and our unique takes on the slate. So I don't make any changes up front here. I'm not touching player projections. I'm not touching ownership. I'm not setting any rules or anything like that. I'm just going to build lineups. And for this, I'm going to set this here to a 150 max and a 50,000 or greater. These are some big contests for the Open Championship this week. And I'm going to just make 2 changes to player projections to abide by the DraftKings regulations here. Request 170 lineups since I'm playing 170 lineups here in my entries file, and build. Now, what SaberSim's doing behind the scenes here as we hit build is we are essentially simulating out the tournament 5,000 times, hole by hole here, and we're going to get a big pool of potential candidate lineups that we can ultimately end up sorting and ranking and filtering through. This is an extremely valuable part of the process here. Most traditional optimizers are using average projections to build your lineups, and average projections are not indicative of upside in golf DFS. They assume a player scores their average 100% of the time, and even other tools like randomness or exposure settings to try to differentiate there are not accurately projecting the real upside of golfers. When we use our hole-by-hole simulations for golfers, you are getting a true idea of the real range of outcomes of these players on the course. When we look at Scottie Scheffler's potential range of outcomes here, yes, we have a projection of 76.05 for Scottie Scheffler here, but we have a full range of outcomes of his potential on this slate. The downside outcomes where he could potentially miss the cut, the upside outcomes and the most common outcomes here in the middle, and then those big winning outcomes that you would need from Scottie if you were going to play him in your lineup this week. Now, we have these different ranges of outcomes for every single golfer in the tournament. They're all going to look a little bit different. They can take into account the short-term and long-term form of each golfer, the individual's golfer's fit for the course, their history on the course, the Vegas odds of this golfer, all of these different things in a hole-by-hole simulation of the tournament. This accounts for individual upside of each golfer on the course in a way that average projections cannot, and is a huge part of the process and a main reason why the process starts with building lineups first. But now that our lineups are built here, we need to sort them to find the best ones to take with us into the contest. We've just built 4,965 lineups from our pool. I only need 170 to take with me into my contest, so which ones do I play? By default, your lineups will be sorted by SaberScore here, which is a custom algorithm we've developed by backtesting using contest sims that takes into account the projection of the golfer, the upside in the form of their 99th percentile, and then it has a negative weighting factor for their adjusted ownership. The adjusted ownership is a better ownership metric that takes into account whether or not a player is good chalk or bad chalk by using our simulations to determine if the player is over or under owned. SaberScore is going to be a great start for identifying the best lineups in your pool. It's going to be directionally accurate at finding the top lineups overall, but this is where a contest sim is extremely valuable. If you're on the SaberSim Ultimate plan, this is where we'll want to run our contest sim. So I'll go ahead and just click that. And what a contest sim instead is doing here is it is taking each lineup out of our pool. It is plugging it into a simulated version of the contest I intend to play here, which in this case, this is the Minimax and the Birdie. And it is seeing how those lineups would each perform if the tournament then played out 100,000 times. We're going straight to the source here, competing our lineups that we might play in this contest against all of the other lineups we expect the field to play, and simply seeing how they actually perform over a long sample. This is a more accurate and precise way to assess lineup quality, and if you're serious about taking down the $1 million this week, I highly recommend starting a 5-day trial to SaberSim Ultimate so you can check out the contest sims and systematically and strategically identify the most profitable lineups from your pool. Now, once the contest sim is complete, we want to sort by the ROI of how these lineups performed within the contest sim here. What I recommend doing is sorting by the risk-adjusted return on investment here using the sorting method dropdown. The ROI is going to take into account both the upside of your lineups and the downside. How often is that lineup winning the tournament? How often is that lineup cashing in the top 1%? But also, how often is that lineup missing the cash line completely? It's the best overall holistic view of the quality of a lineup, and it's the best sorting method here to use for golf DFS. Now, if you're using contest sims, I also recommend at this step filtering out all the lineups that are graded out as unprofitable in the contest sim. As we move to the next step here of diversifying our pool and applying our unique takes, this is a good way to backstop your build and prevent yourself from playing any unprofitable lineups. So to do that, all I'm going to do is click the filter icon here in the upper right, add a filter, and then say to only show lineups where the risk-adjusted return on investment is greater than 0. This is going to filter out a chunk of the pool here and just avoid a situation where we end up playing a lineup that the contest sim is actually unprofitable. Now, the last step here before we start applying our unique research is to diversify our portfolio here. We want to play a strong set of lineups that all have a shot to win, but to make those lineups as different from each other as possible. Golf in particular is extremely high variance. You'll find that your pool offers you a very diverse portfolio of golfers, and we want to make sure that we're not all in on just a few plays. While the idea of taking down a ton of spots in the top 0.1% of the contest is certainly attractive, more than likely what's going to end up happening if you do that is you're going to have a ton of lineups finish outside of the cash line, just based on the way that the payout structures of these contests are set up. Our goal here is to play a portfolio of very diversified, high upside lineups to give us as many unique shots on goal as possible. The best tool to do that is the SaberSim Min Uniques option here, which will make sure each lineup in your set is X players different from one another, where X is the number of Min Uniques. This is going to depend a little bit on how many lineups you're playing. I'm playing 170 lineups here, so I'm not going to be able to get as diversified as you might be able to if you're only playing 10 or 20 or so. But the way I typically recommend using this is first to test out how diverse you can get with Min Uniques while still getting the number of lineups you need. So if I test this at 3, you'll see I'm still getting 170. If I go to 4 here, now I'm only getting 145 lineups back. So my maximum number of Min Uniques I can set is at 3. I typically recommend using 1 less than the maximum number of Min Uniques that you can, which is going to be a nice balance of making sure your lineups are still high upside, high ROI, but also we've diversified our lineups here slightly by making sure no lineup in our 170 set here is just a 1v1 of another lineup we're already playing. Each lineup is at least 2 players different. Now, at this part of the process, we've built out a pool of 5,000 lineups, each one of which is the best possible lineup we could have built for a given way that the tournament might play out. We've run a contest sim to identify which of these lineups are grading out as the most profitable if the DFS contest played out 100,000 times, and we've diversified a little bit using Min Uniques. It is at this point in the process where we're ready to apply some of our research about the slate to make sure we're getting exposure to the players that we like the most here. The most helpful column to figure out how to do this is the leverage column, which is going to calculate your current exposure to the player minus the ownership projection. The players sorted highest, the highest positive values in the leverage column here, are your biggest stands on the slate. These are your leverage plays, where if they have a good tournament, your lineups are most likely to succeed. On the flip side, if we sort this the other direction, the biggest negative leverage plays are your biggest fades. These are the players that you're hoping are going to miss the cut or just overall have a bad tournament. And if they succeed, your lineups are going to suffer, but if they fail, your lineups are going to do well. Now, there's two ways I recommend using the leverage column here. The leverage column, first things first, can be very useful to figure out how to target your research. This is a big player pool for a major this week. You can't necessarily research every single player or have a take on every single player in the pool. If you're looking for a place to start, looking at the top 3 to 5 highest and lowest leverage players in your pool is a great way to target your research. Again, these are the players that make the biggest difference to your overall success. So if you only have time to look at a handful of different players, the players that I would be targeting right now would be Bobby McIntyre, Theegala, Adam Scott, Sungjae Im. And on the flip side, I would be looking into Cantlay, Bryson, Scotty, Hideki here to make sure that I'm comfortable with those fades. This is the direction that the SaberSim Sims think you should take on this slate, but no model is perfect. And if in your research you find a good reason to believe that maybe you do want to get some exposure to a guy like Bryson, for example, you can make an adjustment here and make sure he's not one of your fades. Just as an example of how I would go about doing that, if I wanted to make that adjustment on Bryson, and I don't want him to be my second highest fade on this slate, the easiest way is to think about what do you have to do to your exposure to change this leverage column here. Let's say I just want to be even on the field with Bryson. All I would have to do is set my minimum exposure to say around 14%, click apply, and now we're going to be even with the field here. Our top fades now are Scotty Scheffler, maybe that's a little bit scary in its own right, Patrick Cantlay, Tyrrell Hatton, and Hideki. The other way you can use the leverage column here is as a guidepost for figuring out how much exposure you should get to your favorite or least favorite plays on the slate. For example, a guy I've liked quite a bit heading into this tournament is Tom Kim, who has had a pretty strong summer, especially recently, and I like the idea of being over the field on Tom Kim for this slate. But how much exposure should I get? I'm already getting 4.3 percentage points of leverage on him now. I have 15.3%. We're expecting him to be owned at 11% here. But I want to make him one of my top overall plays. The leverage column can be a useful tool to figure out how high you should go. You don't necessarily need to lock in every golfer you like here to get over the field on a particular golfer. And we can see here right now, my top exposure golfer by leverage is 28.5% over the field. My second most is 25%. Third most is 19%. So if I want Tom Kim to maybe be a top 3 to 5-ish golfer in my portfolio this week, I would probably want to get about 15% over the field. So I can just add 15 percentage points here to his ownership projection and make that my minimum exposure. So I can make him now a 26% owned golfer in my portfolio. And we will see him jump up as my third most owned golfer in my portfolio here. And this is a good amount of leverage to take on this particular player. Following the process so far has said that it makes sense to have about 15 to 25% exposure over the field to our top golfers. That's how the sims have worked out here. That's how the contest sims, that's how diversification, all of this worked out. So now I know that that's about the right amount of exposure to get to a guy like Tom Kim that I like on this slate by looking at the leverage column as that guidepost. Now you can spend as much or as little time as you want on this step. If you don't have any takes about any golfers whatsoever, it's perfectly fine to have just gotten to this point in the process, made no real other changes, and entered those lineups. If you're a grinder and you're putting in your 80 hours this week into research for this slate and you have a bunch of golfers that you want to adjust and tweak and fiddle with, you can follow each of those here and make adjustments to min and max exposures until you're satisfied with your portfolio. If at any point you run into an error message saying that you can't reach the desired exposures for a particular golfer, I'll show what that looks like here. If you see this message at any point, it just means that we don't have lineups in your pool where we can satisfy all of your exposure requirements. What I would recommend doing is clicking keep editing and then rebuild lineups in the upper right, which will start over with a fresh build of 5,000 lineups here, but this time using the exposures that you've set so far as a baseline. This way we'll be able to build a pool that matches what you're trying to do on the slate a little bit better, and you can pick up from there running a new contest sim, filtering out unprofitable lineups, and diversifying again with mid-uniques before returning to making additional exposure setting requirements. I always like to leave my unique twist on my DFS golf lineups before I enter them. It is very early in the week here, where it's Monday afternoon when I'm recording this here, so there's still time for the projections and ownership to change, but I'll give you two ideas of my direction that I'm thinking about taking on this slate. Now, two players I think are particularly mispriced and I think have a potential to come in at extremely high ownership this week are Robert McIntyre and Sungjae Im here. McIntyre, off of his high-profile win last week at the Scottish, he's also a European golfer here, and they always end up being a little bit chalkier for the Open Championship here. And Sungjae Im at just $6,900 here as a DraftKings salary. He hasn't had a great 2024 season, but this is a very, very low price for him relative to his win odds. I think those two golfers are likely to be extremely popular. Now, at the moment, we are projecting them for 17% ownership and about 19% ownership, respectively. I think these could be a lot higher. I could see both of them closer to the 25% range. At the moment, the SaberSim contest simulations like being over the field on these guys, but our contest sims can be pretty sensitive to ownership adjustments. So if they come in higher owned than this, I could see this flipping here, and they might end up becoming players that I want to fade as the week goes along. Now, I'll be going through and reviewing my top players by leverage, high and low, as I actually end up running my final builds later this week. But that's going to be one angle that I want to keep an eye on here, looking at those final ownership projections on Wednesday night. But in the meantime, assuming that we're ready to enter these lineups here into our contest, the last step is to just fill our entries file and upload to DraftKings. To do that, we'll click the Save to My Contest button here. I recommend filling with the unique random fill, which is going to play a unique lineup from your lineup set you just created here into each one of your entries. Save to contests, download selected entries, and we can go ahead and get this uploaded to DraftKings. I couldn't be more excited for the last Millie Maker of the 2024 golf season with the Open Championship this week, because SaberSim users have absolutely been crushing this season so far. I've recorded a strategy guide for all three other majors so far this season, and while you can't go back in time and play those tournaments again, it's another great resource to make sure your golf strategy is fine-tuned and ready for the Open Championship this week. You can check those videos out here, and make sure to subscribe to get a notification every single time I drop another strategy video. Good luck this week, and I'll see you in the next one.